this room. Between the authors and the librarians, we're just all teachers. We love helping people learn stuff.
Sure.
Okay, so still a couple minutes. We like to let everybody get in here. If anybody has any questions, you know, you're an early bird. You can ask questions of any of our guests, or if anybody just wants to, you know, the authors still want to continue conversing back and forth and getting to know each other, that's good too. If you are watching on YouTube, we just started that streaming live. Welcome to a great afternoon / evening with Penguin Young Readers and some amazing authors that have written the best books of 2020. And our title for tonight is Windows, Mirrors, and Sliding Glass Doors. Sheila, do you want to mention or explain that, because you came up with that title?
Oops, just got to unmute. Yeah, so it's something we were at a conference in January, and we were talking to librarians and like trying to get a sense of what they needed, and to a T, every single one of them said, we're looking for books for our kids that will either be a window or a mirror or a sliding glass door to like have them see themselves in the books they're reading. And so I think all of our authors here today and all of the books represented, and Ellen Hopkins when she pops on, her, like, these books are all just perfect for that. They're real stories, they're real situations and things that if kids can't identify with, they can use the mirror, they can or rather the sliding glass door. They like no matter what, every kid will understand and learn more having read these books. So I think I said it earlier on, these are absolutely the top tier best books and best authors of 2020. So I am wildly excited to hear you all talk. I'm gonna mute again. I don't want to be talking. Listen to the geniuses.
I'd love to add something to what Sheila said, because that quote about the mirrors and sliding doors and windows is by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, and she wrote just wonderfully and has impacted the children's literacy so much with that quote, and just shout out to her for giving us the language to talk about that. So thank you.
Well, Sheila's a rock star, and she's such an advocate for all of the works that y'all do, and we're so thankful for her. And she even provided our slides tonight that Kyle will be popping up as you are introduced. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. This is a great time with Penguin Young Readers tonight, when we appreciate them and Sheila Hennessy for helping arrange this. We are going to speak with 6 authors tonight, and they're going to be speaking for about 20 minutes each, and we're looking forward to hearing about their new titles, their new releases, their upcoming releases, and then just getting to know them a little bit. So the first person that's going to go, first author, is Anne Blankman. A lot of you here in Oklahoma know her because her debut novel actually was on the Sequoia Master List a few years ago, Prisoner of Night and Fog, where she actually took on the big task, no big deal, tackling Hitler as a main character. And I've read all about how tough that was for her, but she did an amazing job. Anyway, we want to welcome her from Richmond, Virginia. She grew up near Albany, but Anne Blankman is here. Hello, Anne.
Great. Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just delighted to be here tonight and to talk with all of you. It's always so much fun to get the chance to chat with librarians. Until this school year, I was a children's librarian myself. I was a public librarian for several years and then a middle school librarian. And now I write for children. So obviously the two great loves of my life are kids and books. What better combination is there? So I'm here to talk about my newest book, The Blackbird Girls, which came out in March. And The Blackbird Girls is about 2 girls who are 5th grade classmates and bitter enemies, and who have hated each other for years. And they live in the Soviet Union in 1986. But before I tell you too much more about the book, I actually want to tell you a story about how I got the idea for this story in the first place. And I have wanted to write this book for more than 20 years, which is hard to say, 20 years. Oh my goodness, that's a long time. But for more than 20 years, I've wanted to write this story. And it all began one night in 9th grade when I was hosting a sleepover at my house. And my friends and I were lying in our sleeping bags chatting. You know, we'd done all the typical sleepover stuff. We'd watched a movie and had pizza and eaten popcorn. And it gotten to the point of the night when we were sort of all lying together and giggling and telling stories. And one of the girls started to complain about her parents, like most of us do when we're that age. She started saying, my parents are so nosy. They are always getting into my business. They don't give me any privacy. So all of us, of course, started to complain about how our parents are just the worst. And, you know, we can't wait to be older and be off in college and be on our own. Except for one girl. One girl at the sleepover was not saying a word. She'd gotten very quiet. And this was my friend Victoria. She was brand new to my school. She had just moved to my small hometown in upstate New York, and she had recently immigrated from Ukraine. So I was actually worried that maybe Victoria, she'd recently learned English, so I thought maybe she doesn't quite know what we're the words that we're using. I wanted to make sure she didn't feel left out. So I went over to her and I said, Victoria, are you okay? You got really quiet. She didn't really look at me and she said, no, I'm fine, it's fine. And I said, well, you seem upset. And she said, well, it's just, you guys should not complain about your parents. You don't know how lucky you are to have them. She said, you know, when I was little, I had to live without my parents for a whole year. So of course, I wanted to know, well, why? What happened? Why did you have to live so far away from, you know, why couldn't you live with your parents for a whole year? And she got very uncomfortable and finally she looked at me and she said, I'm a survivor of Chernobyl. And shivers went down my spine because I knew immediately what she was talking about. You know, Chernobyl was then and remains to be this day the worst nuclear disaster in history. And in 1986, when it occurred, my dear friend Victoria was living in Ukraine near the site of the explosion. And I didn't ask her any more about it that night because I could tell she felt, you know, kind of embarrassed. She didn't want to feel different or feel singled out, so I didn't ask her about it. But the next day, I did what I always did, what I still do today. When I had a question, I went to the library. My dad drove me to the public library, and I checked out a couple books on Chernobyl because I wanted to learn more about what my friend had experienced. And the more I learned, the more fascinated I became by this terrible nuclear disaster that was not only a tragedy, but that was initially covered up by the government. And as the years have passed, that story idea has stayed with me. And I'm glad to say that Victoria and I are still very dear friends to this day, and that she and her grandparents graciously allowed me to interview them countless times while I was preparing to write this book. Originally, my 14-year-old self thought that the Blackbird Girls would be kind of a story of survival, like that struggle for survival initially after a terrible disaster. But I couldn't get started whenever I had that idea. I just couldn't start writing. And I finally realized that that idea just wasn't working. And then I began thinking about my friendship with Victoria and how she and I have been friends for more than 20 years. And we've gone through, you know, so many ups and downs together. She lost her mom to cancer at a very young age. While I was actually drafting this book, my husband was diagnosed with cancer at a very young age, and we've really, been there for each other through very tough times. And so I started to realize that what I wanted to write about was not sort of a survival story, but a story about friendship. I'm getting choked up talking about this, but a friendship really inspired by me and my friend Victoria. So as I began coming up with the idea, I decided that this story really needed to have two main characters, and I'm not going to get too much into there's a third main character as well, but just for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to focus mostly on the main two characters, Oksana and Valentina. And Oksana is her class's sort of golden child, right? She seems like she's got everything she could ever want. She seems to be very popular and perfect, and she teases Valentina all the time because Valentina is Jewish. But what nobody knows in the beginning of the story is that Oksana has a terrible secret that she doesn't want anybody to know about herself. And meanwhile, Valentina is dealing with a lot because she is, of course, struggling in 1986 Soviet Union because she is Jewish. And she's got this girl in her class who just will not leave her alone. But then what happens is during the very tumultuous evacuation from Chernobyl, the girls end up being thrown together, and in order to stay safe, they have to evacuate together and travel to far off Leningrad to stay with Valentina's estranged grandmother. And while they're there, Oksana will have to confront all of these lies that her parents have told her all her life about Jews and other lies as well. And Valentina is going to begin to connect with her estranged grandmother and learn more about the secret that her grandmother has. And both Valentina and Oksana will find what they have always wanted, which is best friends. They will become each other's Blackbird Girl, just like my friend Victoria and I are each other's Blackbird Girls, friends for life. So that is really the inspiration behind this book. And I'm happy to take any questions that people have. I'm happy to read a page or two from the book. I know sometimes that can be great, and sometimes that can be boring for attendees. So I'm happy to go either way. But I'm happy to turn the floor over now to any questions. Please don't be shy. I love talking with librarians. I'm, one of you. You're my people. So, and I see that Sheila likes to hear authors reading. Do you guys want to hear a page?
I'm glad that Sheila said what she said, because I would love to hear you read.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to just start off in the very beginning. And what has basically happened in the first chapter is the nuclear power plant at Chernobyl has suffered a terrible explosion. Now, this happens during the night. Well, it's like 1 a.m. when there's this huge explosion in reactor number 4. It rips the roof right off the reactor. It then chunks of melted metal flying through the air. Radiation starts spewing into the atmosphere. More than 20 fires are ignited all across the grounds of the nuclear power plant. Firefighters rush to the scene. They can't get out the fire. The army is called in. Police officers from all over Ukraine are being pulled into Pripyat, which is the name of the city where this takes place. And all of this is happening while the residents of the city are asleep. So imagine that you went to bed one Friday night, you wake up Saturday morning, you're an 11-year-old kid, you're getting ready to go to your half-day school. Back then you had a half-day school Saturday mornings in the Soviet Union. And you wake up to find that the sky above your city has turned red. There's blue-black smoke churning up into the sky. And there are police officers everywhere you look. And Valentina starts off from her perspective. She's very worried because her dad works the night shift at the power plant and he has not come home from work. And so she wants to find out what happened to him, but she also knows that she's never supposed to attract attention, right? So she's nervous to ask any of these policemen that she sees in the street. She can't stop herself. She's got to find out what happened to her dad. So she goes up to one of the nearest police officers as she's walking to school. "Are you here because of the fire?" she asked. The policeman flicked his cigarette into the gutter. "Shouldn't you be in school?" "I'm on my way." Valentina hesitated. Her parents often said her chattering mouth would get her into trouble. Maybe she ought to keep walking to school. But then she thought of the strange blue smoke enveloping the power station and of her father who was in there somewhere. "Why isn't the smoke black?" The policeman narrowed his eyes at her. "There isn't any smoke. That's steam, and you ought to be accustomed to it from living near such a large power station. Now you'd better get on." "Thank you," she muttered and walked on, frowning. The policeman was wrong. Steam was thin and gray, not thick and blue, and it didn't turn the sky red. She knew that much from living close to the nuclear station. Was the policeman lying or mistaken? As she went through the school gates, she saw she had another problem to deal with, and it was waiting for her in the schoolyard. Oksana Savchenko. She was leaning across the against the fence, toying with the white ribbons at the end of her braids. She looked like the perfect Ukrainian girl. Blonde hair, blue eyes, pink and white skin, a porcelain doll come to life. But Valentina knew there was nothing sweet or doll-like about Oksana. The other girl caught sight of her. She pushed off the fence and called, "Valentina, come here." Valentina's heart sank to her shoes. She wished she could run home, but then she'd get in trouble for playing truant. Better to get it over with. Squaring her shoulders, she walked into the schoolyard, where Oksana stood waiting for her. So that's the end of the first chapter, and I think it just shows how strange that first day was after the explosion, because even though there's this horrific accident that's just happened, life was continuing as normal. Like, we went to school, the kids were playing outside for recess that day, breathing in the poisoned air. But I also ended the chapter the way that I did because I wanted to show that even though this horrific accident has happened, for kids, I mean, the most important things at the end of that chapter for Valentina, she's worried about her dad, and she's also worried because, great, now the school bully has got her, in her sights. I think that just shows sort of what it's like to be a kid, right? And what's really important in that moment is also, not just what the sky is red above you, but hey, there's a terrible jerk who's got me, who's ready to tease me about something. So, great. Well, thank you. And I think we still have some time. I don't want to step over into anyone else's time. I think we may have a minute or two for questions, or we may have to cut me off. So.
Oh, you're doing fine. We still have 5 more minutes with
you.
Okay,
good. Great.
Anyone like to ask a question before I do?
Okay.
Anyone? Comments? Questions? Okay. Now, forgive me if I missed anything. I'm not the best listener on the planet, but did you go to Chernobyl or Russia to do any of your research?
Oh gosh, so that's such a great question. I did not, because at the time it felt, unsafe. And also there is, of course, what's crazy to me is that Chernobyl is now like a tourist attraction. I mean, people will go there and they will, put on protective gear, and they're given one of those Geiger counters so that they know when they've overdone their radiation limit, and they can go and take tours and go around and see it. And although I would have loved that opportunity, it just wasn't feasible. So I relied on research and on interviewing my friend and her grandparents and learning about it that way. It's interesting you asked that question, because since I write historical fiction, I have in the past traveled to places where I've set my stories, and it can be a double-edged sword, because sometimes you go there and the place has changed so much from the time period that you're writing about that it can actually kind of mess you up sometimes.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have a friend who traveled to and went to Chernobyl and stuff.
Oh,
and
yeah?
And so I was just curious if you went there, because it seemed pretty interesting. He was sending all kinds of reports back about the radiation numbers for that day and all that stuff.
I bet it was eerie being there. Yeah.
So Victoria's family, once the final product was done, what did they think? I mean, were they just really thrilled when you completed the book?
Yes. It was very exciting for my friend Victoria. And I get all emotional talking about it sometimes. It was really, really exciting for her. She was also just thrilled because her daughter is exactly the right age for this book. So it was so exciting for her to like sit down and share it with her daughter, because not only was she able to say, here, this is something that my friend wrote, but she was also able to say, this was a great way for her to talk to her daughter about, hey, these are the things that I went through when I was a kid. There are some sections in this book that take place in World War II, and she was able to say, this is what your great grandparents, my grandparents went through during World War II. So it was a great way, like a great springboard into some good family discussion as well.
Great.
Absolutely.
Still a couple more minutes. Anybody? I still have questions if no one else does. Okay, so here you are. You've just been a children's librarian in Richmond, Virginia, and we're way out here in Oklahoma. We're not anywhere near all the primary sources that you have access to up there. What's a couple of things that you've had in your library before, whether it's when you were a youth services librarian or something, even in your most recent, that we would be really jealous of that you had in your collection?
Well, I have to say, the materials that you would be the most jealous of would be in my college library. I worked in my college library as an undergraduate. I mean, of course, right? But I got to work in their special collections, their archives, and that is quite an experience. I got to see, so that even though it doesn't really relate to research, but I got to see these amazing Audubon prints, by John Audubon, the botanical prints they did in the 1800s, and those are really amazing. So I got to see some pretty incredible stuff. The scariest thing that ever happened to me was when I was going through the archives and I was in the ephemera section, which is like all the paraphernalia, and I was retrieving an item for a faculty member, and I got this acid-free cardboard box off the shelf and opened it, and it had a skull inside, and that was really something. It was a skull from like an early settler from the 1600s. So you never know what you're going to find in a library, right?
Never know. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. We've had a chance to speak with Anne Blankman, whose newest book just came out, Blackbird Girls, in March, and we want to make sure that everybody has it. I was going to ask a question. We have 1 minute left. Jane Yolen and Patricia Riley Giff and Margaret Peterson Haddix all reviewed. Hold on, we have somebody who's cutting in here. Kyle's trying to find out who's got the feedback going.
Okay.
Anyway, you've been an author now, as far as being published for about 6 years. How awesome is it when you hear that, when you see them,
oh my gosh,
doing your reviews?
It's incredible. It is absolutely amazing to know that authors whose work you love and respect and whose books you've read for years, to know that they have enjoyed your work as well. Obviously, I love Jane Yolen. Margaret Peterson Haddix, I actually studied her books in library school. And then Patricia Riley Giff, she was actually the first person to blurb the Blackbird Girls. And when I was 8 years old, Patricia Riley Giff visited my elementary school. And I still remember sitting in, the cafeteria listening to her talk to us. And I remember her saying how, if you really want to write, you can do it. You can be a writer. And I went home that day from school and told my mom, I'm going to be a writer. Patricia Riley Giff says I can do it. She says anybody can do it. And then, 30 years later, she provided a blurb for my book. So it was a pretty amazing feeling.
Yes. And you love doing school visits and virtual visits. So if they can go to your website, is it anneblankman.com?
It is. It's anneblankman.com. Librarians, please shoot me an email. You can email me through my website. I love to do school visits, either in person or virtually, and I do not charge for virtual visits. So I know budgeting is always an issue, having been a librarian myself. So please get in touch with me, and I'd love to set something up. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. All right, I'm going to mute myself so I don't take over anyone else's spot. Thanks.
All right, we are having a lot of fun with Penguin Young Readers, with special thanks to Sheila Hennessy for making this all possible. Our next special guest is Torie Maldonado. He is not only a teacher in his home area of Brooklyn, New York, teaches 6th grade, but also he's been named the top 10 Latino author and best middle grade and young adult novelist for African Americans. And he was spotlighted as a top teacher by New York City's former chancellor. And since he was a 6th grade teacher and I was a 6th grade teacher, I feel like I probably was never as good as him. But we want to welcome Torie Maldonado, who's going to be talking about his newest release, What Lane? Welcome, Torie.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, cool. First, I want to say thank you for letting me be with you tonight and to share this space. You know, I have to clap for everybody who's here because I've said it before and I'll say it again. Zoom anxiety is tiring. Is being on Zoom, you know, it's no joke. So thanks for pushing through and being here. Also, I'm also extra excited, and this excitement just popped up because I heard Oklahoma. And when I heard Oklahoma, you know, before everybody got on, I asked the Brown brothers, how close are you to Tulsa? Anybody here saw The Watchmen on HBO? If you did, you could just say, yes, me, I, inside the chat, just so I could see that. The Watchmen is a really relevant movie to see right now, considering everything that's happening in the United States. It also relates to the book, What Lane, that I wrote, that just came out, that's already in its short release has gained 3 stars. And I'll talk about how it relates later. Tulsa, Oklahoma, The Watchmen. The Watchmen is based off of a comic. And I want to start there because I grew up as a reluctant reader in Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in the same housing projects that a little known NBA basketball star came from. You might have heard of him. His name is Carmelo Anthony. And so Carmelo Anthony's older brother and I, we went to daycare, then to elementary school, then to junior high school with each other. So the Anthony family and my family knew each other. And Carmelo Anthony, a lot of people don't know that he's like me. My family is split African American and Puerto Rican. I mentioned Carmelo, and I mentioned growing up in Red Hook Projects because it was a tough neighborhood, and not according to me, according to Life magazine. Life magazine came in and did a 9-page photo spread on my neighborhood. They asked me to be a part of it when I was a little kid, but the voice of my mom told me, hey, you don't know these people, don't let them take pictures of you. And that 9-page photo spread came out and showed our neighborhood to be really tough. Life magazine called us one of the 10 worst neighborhoods in the United States of America. When you grow up in a neighborhood that's tough, you start to try to wear that armor just so that you could survive. And I was a studious kid. I was a bookish brown brother, and I got bullied as a result of it. And no matter how much I got bullied, my mom persisted. I call my mom my Puerto Rican Yoda. And the reason I call her my Puerto Rican Yoda is because she's about up to my chest. She's small, I'm tall. And she also spoke like Yoda in riddles and in quotes. She had me for the longest time thinking that my Angelou quotes were her quotes until I went to school and found out that my Angelou came up with "be a rainbow" in someone else's cloud. I went home and said, "Ma, I thought that was you." So my mom, she said, books are going to help you journey. They're going to journey you out of this tough neighborhood. They're going to help journey you to places that no one in our family has gone before. And when I say that, I think of, like, you know, sci-fi quotes. you know, like to infinity and beyond, you know, to boldly go where no man has gone before. You know, my mom, she told me that books would help me do that. She also put in me that love of quotes that she had. And I want to start with how I eventually got hooked to books. My mom made a deal with me after I got left back. I got left back because I unplugged from books. I unplugged from books because the books didn't love me, so I didn't love the books back. They stereotyped my family, they stereotyped me, they stereotyped my community, they stereotyped my allies. So like my peers and like the people around me and like every generation before me and after me in my neighborhood, I unplugged from books. And my mom, to get me back on the road that books would take me on, she said, "You could read anything, I'll buy it, anything." And you know, that was a huge promise for my mom to say she would buy me books because money was tight. You know, she's a single mom. I had my siblings. You know, so where she can get that money? But she did. She got me money to buy comic books, and I got hooked to comic books. This is one of the reasons why I made this agreement with myself when I was in the 7th grade. I said, if I ever make it out of my housing projects, I'm gonna write a book, and that book is gonna feel like a graphic novel. It's gonna feel like a comic book, and I'm gonna bring it back to my neighborhood, to my housing projects, and it's gonna be a roadmap. It's gonna help young people and families to journey to the places that books have taken me in my imagination and physically. You know, so I wrote What Lane, and recently Betsy Bird of the School Library Journal compared it to the recent Newbery winner, New Kid. And she compared it because it has a comic book feel. Another librarian, her son is a super graphic novel fan. He read the book and he said, "Ma, this should be a graphic novel. It reads like a graphic novel. It feels like a movie." And that ties into comics, you know, that comic energy. I wrote What Lane with a comic book energy. Also, I wrote it with another energy from another comic, Daredevil. If anybody's seen Netflix's Daredevil, there's a scene in the one of the seasons at the very end where a white female reporter, she doesn't know what to write. She's sitting at her desk, and her boss comes up to her. And he says, "What are you doing? You know, do you have writer's block?" And she said, "I don't know what to write." You know, and he tells her something. And what he told her, I reacted so strongly to it that I took my cell phone, ran to the screen, and I audio recorded it. I have it right here. I could play it for you right now. He said to her, "This is New York City. And in New York, everybody thinks that they've seen it all. Everybody in New York, they think that they've heard it all. Everybody in New York, they think that they've lived it. So if you're gonna write something, you have to write something that they don't know, that they haven't seen, that they haven't heard." And that was my goal. As I wrote What Lane, my goal was to tell a story that no one has ever heard before, that will be a window into young people's lives, that you will hear things that young people have told me over the 20 years that I've been teaching middle school, that they don't even tell their parents. And so there's another person who I met at NCTE in Baltimore. He recently, Paul Hankins, he got on Twitter. So if Paul sees this, what's up, Paul? He got on Twitter and he said, Torie Maldonado is the work. He is What Lane. I lived this book, the book that I'm about to share with you, that I'm going to read to you. This book is me. Nancy Paulson is my editor, and she almost brought me to tears when the arc came out because we were inside Penguin, and she said, "I want to show you something." And she picks up What Lane, the arc, and shows it to me. And she says, "This is you, isn't it?" And I could have almost cried because it is me. And she did the same thing with my second book, Tight. She looked at the cover and she said, "This is you, isn't it?" And you know, if you go to Amazon, you go to Goodreads, there are reviews where people say, "You cannot have written Tight. You could not have written what lane unless you have lived it. And that's 100% true. Going to quotes, I want to share another quote with you, but this quote is going to be a quiz because I'm a teacher, so it has to be quiz time. I'm going to ask you this quote. Who said this? Love is in need of love today. You could type it in the chat if you like to type it in the chat, or you could say it, whatever you want. But who said that? Love is in need of love today. And I can give you another line if you want to hear. Hate's going around, breaking many hearts. Stop it, please, before it goes too far. Does anybody know who said that? I see Molly. Molly, ding, 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 ding. 100% correct. Kristen Shaw, hey, what's up? Yes, it's Stevie Wonder. He said that. How many people here agree? Please put that in the chat, that right now we're looking at the media and love is in need of love today, that we need to stop the hate that's going around. And if you agree, you know, someone said, yes, yes, yeah, yes, absolutely, yes. You know, there's another quote that I fell in love with, not from Stevie Wonder. You may know who said it. I don't know who said it, but it said, be the change that you want to see. And that's what my mom always encouraged me to do. She said, listen, you know, you want a new narrative, you have to write the narrative. You want to change your life story, you have to rewrite your life story. And I'm going to connect that to a quote that she loved, that she had me thinking was hers, but it wasn't hers. It was Maya Angelou again. You know, when you know better, you do better. And I tried to write What Lane when I was a 7th grader, when I was in middle school. I wrote it as a 12-page paper. And the young people in my class, you know, my peers, they loved it. They wanted more of it. The teacher, though, the teacher looked like she was a part of the ice bucket challenge and someone threw cold water on her. She didn't know how to handle the conversation. But if she would have trusted us as a class, we would have navigated, we would have steered the entire conversation for her, because a lot of times adults call topics that are in What Lane tough topics. And what we know from Betsy Bird and her comparing it to the Newbery winner, New Kid, what we know from a lot of librarians and some that I see who are in this chat, you know, these are not tough topics for young people. Young people are talking about this stuff all the time. They visit us during our off times and they just want to talk about it. So I've presented a lot of the conversations, the talks inside What Lane, so that you could just let young people start steering the conversation, and we as adults will be wide-eyed passengers, seeing through the window into their hearts and into their minds. And now that takes us to where we are in history. Right now we're seeing Ahmaud Arbery happened. We saw the white woman in Central Park call the cops on an African-American man wrongfully. We're seeing everything with the Black Lives Matter protests. And I came up with this quote. This is mine. So if you want to share it, please share it. Just, you know, put my name, Torie Maldonado, next to it. Friendships formed prevent harm. Now that rhymes a little, but a better lyricist, an icon, Tupac, said it. He said, learn to see me as a brother instead of two different strangers. And that's what all my books do. My first book, Secret Saturdays, my second book, Tight, and my third book, What Lane. These are all, you know, it's funny, my mother must know I'm talking about her because my mom just tried to call. Her ears are ringing. And all of my books, they change the narrative about Black males and about Black people and about Latino people and also our allies. My mom told me when I was a kid and I first picked up the pen and tried to write, she said, write the truth, write the yin and write the yang, write everything. Don't write stereotypes. And so that's what I do. I strive to write the truth, everything. Like the Daredevil quote, what you haven't seen, what you haven't heard, what you haven't lived, and you find real, full, complex characters inside my book. I have to say this before I start reading to you, that Jennifer Clark of the Hudson Children's Book Festival, she calls me the Will Smith of writing, because you don't find curse words in my books, and you don't find bomb chicky womp womp inside my books, because I'm a teacher. I'm also a parent. I don't want any parents coming to me and saying, hey, you need to clean your mouth out with Orbit, you know, because you have a potty mouth. And also, you know, I want to write books that my 12-year-old daughter can pick up. By the way, my 12-year-old daughter, the dedication of this book is to her, and it's right here. It says, for Ava, the world is yours. And for those of us who are hip hop fans, that's a secret challenge to you to figure out, where did I get that line from? The world is yours. So I have to say, all of my allies on Amazon, on Goodreads, on Twitter, on social media, they have been really passing this book, What Lane, on, so that they could help us do what Tupac said: learn to see me, learn to see Black males as brothers instead of strangers. And so I'd like to read a scene here to you. How am I doing with time, by the way?
You're doing fine. We could probably go another 4 or 5 minutes.
4 or 5 minutes. Awesome. Okay. So I want to read a scene to you. And this scene, I didn't plan to read this scene, but one of my students told me today that I need to read this scene to you. The reason why is because he said that it happened to him. And so that's wild, you know, like I wrote art that imitated my life. And it turns out that when you go deep, deep enough into your heart, you connect with other hearts. So I got to give a shout out to, you know, one of my students who said, read the scene, Mr. T. He said, because this scene really happens, and we see how people make assumptions, and they will immediately put you in a lane that could lead to a crash. So I like to read this scene right here. If you have the book, please turn to page 40. And by the way, what slipped out of my book is Miles fandom stickers, Miles Morales stickers. And that was sent to me by Ro Menendez, a librarian who also is a super fan of What Lane, and has been using it with her young people in Texas. So the next afternoon, I can't believe it, when it happens, me and Dan, by the way, Stephen, he looks like Stephen Curry. They even joke in the book and call him Stephen Curry. And his friend Wes is African-American, and his friend Dan is white. And Wes and Stephen's Black and Latino friends, they don't hang out with Stephen's white friends. And the white friends don't hang out with the Black and Latino friends. They're all in different lanes, but things happen in the book that swerve everybody into the same lane and show that we are really in a common fight and in a common drive to a higher ground of empathy and understanding and togetherness. So he's with his white friend. So the next afternoon, I can't believe it, when it happens, me and Dan, we're walking, and Dan, he soft smacks me. Boom. It was fun. That's how we start slap boxing. This is how we sometimes play. If one of us soft smacks the other, it's on. We start boxing like two UFC fighters or Creed. Right now, I bob and weave, swing. You think you're better than me? Dan, he blocks like, whoa. Swing, he swings at me and misses. Watch me beat you. I say something I heard Muhammad Ali say. Beat me. I float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Swing, swing. He skips around me and he drops his guard. Swing, swing. I catch him. I tag his cheek. Kids our age walk by, and a few hawk us as we slap box, like two cats pawing each other on those internet GIFs. Then a woman's voice barks at me. Young man, leave that boy alone. Yo, why is she yelling at me? What happens next is so wild, I feel outside of myself seeing it happen. Go back to your own neighborhood. Don't bring trouble here, she tells me. Huh? She thinks I can't live here since it's a mostly white neighborhood and I'm Black? And she thinks I'm trouble? The man with her talks to Dan. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Should we call the cops? Whoa! Dan interrupts them. This is my best friend. We're playing. The look on the couple's faces, their minds, won't let them believe me that I'm tight with Dan, that we're best friends. The lady's head jerks back. Oh! The guy's eyes slit and stay on me like I'm no good. They walk off and Dan hangs an arm around me. What's up their butts? They think they're the cops or something. I shrug. I don't know. He jokes. And why they ask me if I was okay? Don't they know? I'm better than you. Better? I hear those words in my ear. Better? I ask Dan, hold up. How are you better than me? What? Dan, you said you're better than me. Bruh, in slapboxing. Oh, I feel like I'm bugging out. Maybe making this about something else. But I have to ask Dan. Besides slapboxing, we the same, right? Equal, right? Yeah, of course. We're equal. Why? Dan scans my face. Stefan, you good? I lift my fist for Dan to fist bump. Dead it, bruh. I'm good. We good. He fist bumps me. Good, because I might have to slap you again. He jumps, jokey, to slapbox me some more. Nah, I put his hands down. I tell him, not here, not now. When I read that to my student, I asked him, I said, I noticed you were reacting, like, why? Why did you react? And he said, words came to mind as he was hearing that scene: hurt feelings, sad, disrespect, mistreated, stressed. And I asked him, who do you attribute, who was feeling that in that scene? And he said, Stefan, the mixed boy. And then he volunteered this and said, but Dan is not feeling that. He said, Dan is privileged. Dan is given respect. Dan feels up. So I just wanted to share that scene with you, and hopefully you could ask me some questions and we could figure out how we could use that scene so we could build better allies and think about how the situation affects right now.
All right. Well, we're almost out of time. So if you have a question, jump in right now.
Someone asked, yes.
This is beautiful. Is there an audio version of the book?
Well, I have to tell you, Lin-Manuel Miranda has the song "Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story." Penguin asked me if I wanted certain voice actors to do the reading, and I said, listen, give me a shot. I'm not going to give up my shot. And they let me do the audio. So yes, the audio is being used around the world right now, and you'll hear my voice if you like it.
Fabulous.
Okay. Well, we have to move on, and I hate that. But let me just tell everybody a few things. Make sure that you have What Lane and also Tight and Secret Saturdays in your library. Also, there's some anthologies that you can find some really neat stuff from Torie. He's written one in One Death, 9 Stories. He's written a short story in there. And also, this is an interesting one, Whole Library Handbook Teen Services. He wrote something in there called The Rubber Band Ball of Guys in Reading, Considering Boys in Collection Development and Library Service. So make sure, that seems like an important article for you to read as well, or, so make sure you get that, especially if you have that book. But, if you like books that don't have cursing and sex and that are about turning boys into better men and things like that, make sure that you have Torie's books. One last thing, Torie offered to give away. Okay, you go ahead.
Can I say one thing? There are some amazing librarians and educators who are being the change that we want in the world. And they say that my Twitter feed really helps push their thinking. So follow me on Twitter. I'm at Torrey Maldonado. I'm also on Instagram at Torie Maldonado too.
Okay, last thing, Torie was kind enough, he said that we could give away a signed book maybe, and then also a virtual visit. So we're just not going to give that away flippantly.
Yeah.
What, two?
It's two, meaning those are separate. One person will win a book and one will win a virtual visit.
Yeah, so what we'd like to do is we'd like to ask anybody who's interested to email us at Brown Brothers Books, because we want to make sure that this book and the virtual visit are in the right situation. We want, kids that you love, a group of kids that would really benefit from getting to know Torie, and having him talk to him would be amazing. So email us brownbrothersbooks@gmail.com and tell us about the special kid or a group of kids who would like to either have that book or the visit, and that's how we'll do that. Torie, this was amazing. Wish we had more time. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
And we're going to move along with our Evening with Penguin Young Readers authors. Our next author is actually a duo, two authors who have joined together to write a great book. Irene Latham and Kareem Shamsi Basha, hopefully I'm saying that right. They have written a book called The Cat Man of Aleppo, close. Anyway, and it came out in April. It's had multiple starred reviews. Irene Latham is a well-known author of children's books and adult books, and Kareem Shamsi Basha is an award-winning writer and photographer. Thank you all for being here today. We'd love to hear about your new book.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Kareem. Can we hear Irene?
Here we go.
Yes.
Are we good?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to share this time with other book lovers. I have to tell you that during this pandemic, one of the toughest things for me has been not having access to my library. I reserve books like crazy, and not having my books is just, it's been tough. So I'm really hoping for an end to that soon. So it's great to hear your stories, Torie and Anne, and thank you for sharing, and thank you guys for having us. I grew up in a book-loving family. My dad read voraciously, like a book a day, and read to us, and it started me out on Shel Silverstein poems and Dr. Seuss. And I've always been very shy, never imagined that I would write publicly. I was writing a lot of poems just for my own, just because I love to. And then eventually I got brave enough to share my work. But this particular project is really special. I do have other books in the market, but this is the first time I've written about a living hero, nonfiction, and could not have done it without Kareem. I learned about the Cat Man. This is the book, The Cat Man of Aleppo, and Aleppo is in Syria. And you may remember when what we were getting on our news every day was just tragic news about the bombing in Aleppo. And that was coming across the Twitter feed. It was probably around December of 2016 at its height. And I remember at that time, I also was seeing on Twitter something about this guy who, instead of fleeing, like so many did for their lives, the refugees out of Syria are just tremendous numbers. But he decided to stay, and he was an ambulance driver, and he decided to stay and take care of these creatures who could not take care of themselves. So he took it upon himself to start feeding the cats, and eventually created a sanctuary for the cats. And the story went viral, and now over the years has, gotten support from people across the world. So the Cat Man is known worldwide. So when I read the story on Twitter, I knew instantly that this needed to be a children's book. Kids need to know that there's people out here doing good work, and that beauty can exist even in a war-torn place, and that there's hope for even our most, helpless creatures. And but I'm not from Syria. We are, as Torie was talking about, own voices telling the stories that you grew up. The stories that you've experienced is a big movement in children's literature now. And while I do have experience living in Saudi Arabia, that's not Syria. And of course, I know about compassion and all those things. And then I remembered Kareem, who we both at the time lived in Birmingham, Alabama. Kareem's still there. I live just north of the city, but we had run into each other a number of times at literary events, and Kareem had shared his story. And I'm going to let him pass it to him so he can tell you his story.
So Irene came to me and said, have you heard about this guy? I grew up in Syria. I immigrated to the United States when I was 18 in 1984 to go to college and to attain something minor called freedom that we enjoy in this country. Anyway, so she came to me and said, have you heard about this guy? And I was so ashamed that I had not. And we looked him up, and she said, do you want to do a children's book on him? And I jumped all in. And the next thing I know, I'm talking to him on the phone, and the guy is like the Mother Teresa of Syria. I mean, he has saved cats, dogs, donkeys. He traveled to Turkey just to take 5 monkeys there for somebody else. He has built an orphanage in the war. The war has lasted in my country for almost 10 years. It's over now, but things are still rough, and it's going to take them 50 years to rebuild the country. But he stayed when everybody fled and left their cats, and he took care of them. And it's an incredible story. And I spoke with him on the phone, and I said, we want to do a children's book on you. And he welcomed the idea, and the book wrote itself. I mean, it was the easiest book to write because the story is so incredible. So I'll never be able to thank Irene enough for turning me on to this.
And I'll never be able to thank Kareem enough for jumping in. I mean, it was like before we even looked him up online, he's like, really? He's doing this? Yes, I'm in. And I do want to share, because we're picture book, this is a picture book. I mean, the book would be nothing without Yuko Shimizu, the illustrator. This is her second picture book. She is an artist located in New York City. And she did such extensive research on this book. She's Japanese American. She is not from Syria, but she included a note in the back of the book that talks about the photo research. And I will just share an anecdote because when you create a picture book, at some point the editors will send you the sketches. And I remember looking at this picture of one of the little girls, and she has this barrette in her hair, which you can see right there. And I thought, that's not a barrette you would see in Syria. my own ignorance, of course. And Yuko sent back a picture and showed an actual photograph from Syria of this child with that barrette. That shows you her attention to detail. But one of the biggest gifts she gave this book was her commitment to a cultural understanding of Syria. Wouldn't you say so, Kareem?
She did so much research. She would send me links to the things online, and I would send her links. And she did research for a good 6 months, nonstop, to get everything that she needed to know what to illustrate and how to illustrate it, because of the mosques and the churches and all the scenery in Aleppo is very different than even Damascus, the capital. Aleppo competes with Damascus for the title of the oldest inhabited city on earth. So the scenes in it are quite dramatic. Yeah, she did an unbelievable job.
Yeah, I thought I would just share a couple of the spreads that I think are so powerful. I think it gives children an opportunity to see a place that they've never seen. And many of them have such a limited idea of what it's really like in Syria. And I know Kareem can speak to this as well. But on the page where, even when war comes to Aleppo, Allah doesn't flee like so many others. So you've got this black spread, and through the window, you see the destruction in the city. So you've got just powerful emotions, and then you've got a page like this, which is just full of cats. There's actually 128 cats on this page, which is no lie. I mean, the numbers are incredible for the amount of cats that were left behind. I think it's, I learned so much during.
Can I show my favorite page?
Ah, do it.
Okay, so I want everybody to look at this page closely and notice that Allah is in the corner watering flowers. So here's a question for everyone. Like all the kids are playing, everybody's going nuts, but he's just sitting there watering flowers. Here's my question. When did you hear the word Syria and flowers in the same sentence? Like, when? Did you ever hear that? Because every time we hear something about a Muslim Arab country, it has to do with terrorism. It has to do with war. It has to do with all these negative things. He's sitting there watering flowers. I just want to cry right now because this is, we love, we nurture, we do all these great things. We save, we do amazing. I mean, we have virtues just like every other culture and country, but you never hear about that. All you hear about is the negative stuff. So this was the gift that Irene gave me when she told me about this book, is that we shared a story of humanity with the world out of Syria. And there's many, many, many stories of humanity out of all countries, but you never hear those. All you hear is negative stuff. And we're you know, my mission in life is to change that. And this was one of the steps.
Yeah, and something else really special, Allah has just been just a huge cheerleader for the book. He's been just thrilled, and I can't speak to him since I don't speak Arabic. So grateful Kareem is able to
I taught you something in Arabic though, I taught you.
At a signing, we did a virtual signing when the book came out, and while we were signing books, Kareem taught me how to sign my name in Arabic because one
Tell
of
him
the
what I said.
people had asked for it. Oh yeah. So Kareem, I'm struggling, and Kareem said it looked like a second grader or a first grader, I think, had written it, but he was very complimentary in my efforts toward learning to write. And I do want to share that one of the really special things about this book too is that in the front of the book we have a note from Allah, and Penguin printed it in Arabic and also in English. And I just think as a kid who was fascinated by other cultures, and just to see that beautiful language and in his voice too, I think is really a special thing. So
he's such a special guy, and his ideas of what he does, he's very humble, and he's like, I'm not doing anything special. And I'm like, yeah, you're pretty special. And he's like, not really. And he completely denied celebrity, and he still denies celebrity, and he's known all over the world. He's just quite amazing. Very humble.
And basically his take, I'll read you the first, Kareem, I'll read the first sentence in English, and why don't you read it in Arabic from the note?
Okay.
So it's a note from Allah. It says, "Dear reader, this is a story about cats and war and people, but most of all, it's a story about love."
مذكرة من علاء عزيزي القارئ. هذه قصة عن القطط وبني آدم في زمن الحرب، ولكن الأهم أنها قصة عن الحب. Hub is love.
So
yeah, it was such an honor to have him write this note and send it to us, and it was just incredible.
Hey Kareem, there's a request for you to teach the group something in Arabic.
Oh, okay. All
you
right,
have,
so,
you have a phrase?
Any ideas of what? Any ideas?
We love books.
We love books. Okay, Anna.
Anna.
Say after me, Anna. Anna.
Anna.
Anna.
Bahib. Bahib.
Bahib.
B-A-H-E-B. Bahib.
Bahib.
Kitab.
Kitab.
Kitab. K-E-T-A-B. Kitab.
Say it again all together.
أنا بحب كتاب. I'll write it in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're happy to take any other questions at this time. And thank you guys for being here.
Like, you mentioned how with the flower comment about how we have certain thoughts about other countries and we have, a lot of unknowns. What are some other resources that the two of you really love that we can make sure that we have for our kids in our libraries that will help them, develop the hope and the love and the knowledge of what kids are what life is like, and that they're just like them and all that good stuff. Do you have anything like that?
Well, I would just say, related particularly to this book, Twitter, the Cat Man of Aleppo, he has a Twitter feed and they post pictures of the cats all the time, and there's always an inspiring message, and they talk about where the animal came from and what they're doing for them, and really wonderful and child friendly for sure.
Also, if you Google things like humane stories from Syria for children, you'll get a plethora of ideas. And I did one time, and it was just one thing after the other of just wonderful things happening in that country that you never hear about in the media.
And I will just plug another book that I just read this past week called The Arabic Quilt. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's just came out this year also, and it's about these children who add their names to a quilt in Arabic. And I thought, what a wonderful activity for children to write their names in Arabic, and it would be a great book to pair with this one, actually.
I know both of you have a nice list of other projects and books and poetry that you've done before. Are there any of those that you would like to mention, or maybe something that you each have coming up in the future that you would like to let us know about?
I'd love to mention my YA novel that is on my second round revisions with Penguin. It's called Cactus Pear. Do you know what a cactus pear is? It's the fruit on the cactus. Thorny on the outside, but soft and luscious inside. I use it as a metaphor for the war. But it's about a Muslim 15-year-old boy in love with a Christian girl in the middle of civil war in Syria. And it's basically just says that love is stronger than any label we can put on each other. So I look forward to that coming out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, this for 2020, I was planning on a big year. I was not planning on everything that actually happened this year, but because I have 4 books releasing this year. Cat Man is one of them. I've also had the wonderful partnership with the poet Charles Waters. You may be familiar with Can I Touch Your Hair? Poems of Race, Mistakes, and Friendship. We have a new book that just came out called Dictionary for a Better World. Poems, quotes, and anecdotes from A to Z. Just really a wonderful book for this time right now to give children some words and some focus on building a better world. And then I have 2 other poetry books also that come out this year. So if you have a little love for some poetry, please do check my website and check out these books. Would love to hear from you, and love to talk poetry for sure. And thanks so much for listening about the Cat Man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
I think we still have another minute or two. I have a question. You came to America in 1984, right? About okay. So
that's correct.
Here's just a question that came to my mind: which has changed more since 1984, Syria or America? Because you've experienced both. Is that a question?
That's a very good question. I would say Syria because of the war. The war lasted 8 to 9 years, and it completely destroyed, flattened complete cities and villages. Yeah, I would say Syria, but it's also changed because of the exposure to the West that's increasing dramatically. Now in one day you can learn what you could have learned in years about the West. So those 2 things are adding to incredible change. The young people want a different country than the dictator does. And, the change is just incredible what's going on right now. But we have change as well. So I don't know. That's a hard question to answer.
Right.
But it's a good question.
And y'all are both from Alabama, correct?
I live in Birmingham, yeah.
Okay. And so did that help with this whole process with your geography and your closeness to each other?
Yes.
It definitely did. I wouldn't have known Kareem otherwise. We met through Birmingham literary events that we were both attending. So it was an essential part of the story. I've since moved north of the city to our kids were empty nesters. And so we moved to the lake, a very quiet little lake. So getting lots of writing done up here and watching a storm roll in right this very minute, actually. So.
Was there anything else?
Irene is quite the star in Birmingham. And when she came to me and said, would you like to do this book? I was like, me? Lowly me? Yeah.
Was there anything else that y'all would like to, promote your website or anything else that you would like for us to make sure if we would like to get to know you more or contact you or talk to you about virtual visits or school visits? How do we do that?
It's all
I'm working on my website. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you go to my website, all that information is there. I do virtual visits, in-person visits. We'll see when those happen again. But I really enjoy working with students with writing. So would love to hear from you guys. Thank you.
I'm working on my website right now, and it'll be done in about 3 to 4 weeks. So just the domain is kareembooks.com. Just check it out in a month or so.
Okay. Kareem Shamsi Basha and Irene.
That's perfect.
Oh, I did it. Good. Okay, good. I just can't say what you taught us earlier. I haven't memorized that one yet. But anyway, their book, The Cat Man of Aleppo, is just a beautiful book, and make sure that you have it in your library this fall and get their other books as well. Thank y'all so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, our next special guest is Jenny Torres Sanchez, whose newest book came out just in the last 2 weeks. We Are Not From Here. It was her 5th book, and she's a former English teacher, so she has that in common with you all. And she lives in Orlando, Florida, and we are so excited to have her here tonight. Jenny Torres Sanchez, thank you for being here. And we're trying to unmute her right now. There she is. Okay. Oh, now she's muted again. Hold on.
She's still muted.
Okay, we're trying to unmute you, or you can try. There we go. There we go.
All right.
All right. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity to tell you a little bit about myself and my books and what I write. I am the author of 5 YA novels, and all of my books deal with difficult truths. I feel drawn to write about difficult things. I use it as my touchstone, and it's what guides my writing. And it's just that being honest with young readers and being not afraid to talk about those things that sometimes people are afraid to talk about or they don't know how to talk about, that's just very important to me. It's very important to me in my life. It was very important to me as a teacher. And now as a writer, that's what I do in my books. My latest novel, like you said, is called We Are Not From Here. And this is a story that focuses on the harsh realities of migrant children. Let me tell you a little bit about it. It's a book about 3 teens, and their names are Pulga, Pequeña, and Chico. And all of those names in Spanish actually mean small in some way, shape, or form. And those 3 teenagers are from Guatemala, and they're trying to get to the United States border for safety. And they're riding on this train called La Bestia. La Bestia, if you don't know about it, is actually a series of cargo trains. It's not just one train, it's several trains that run from the southern part of Mexico all the way up to the US border. And it's an incredibly dangerous train to ride. Really, the poorest migrants and the most desperate migrants who really feel that they have no other way of getting out of their situations, this is the method that they use. Many people fall to their death on La Bestia, and many people suffer horrific injuries. So it is really, it's pretty serious. But this is the method that my three characters try to use to get to the United States because they are poor and they are desperate. But the book focuses first on the lives of these three teenagers in Guatemala. We actually spend a good amount of time, and a good portion of the book is dedicated to really trying to show what their life is like there first before they go, before they're trying to flee. That was important for me to do as a writer because of course, I wanted to show the danger, and I wanted to be honest about what they encounter that makes them leave in the first place. But it was very important for me to show the community and the love and the family that they're actually surrounded by in their homeland, and that they leave behind the difficulty of leaving that behind and the sacrifice of leaving all of that behind. So we're actually with them in Guatemala for quite a while before we follow them on their treacherous journey. And first, because they are in Central America, first they have to figure out how to get from Guatemala to Mexico, because La Bestia starts in Mexico. But, we follow them on their journey, and we see the struggles that they face and the hardships and the danger, but also the love and the kindness and the community that they encounter on their journey as well. And that was really important for me to do with a book like this, because I want to be honest about what they are dealing with, but I also want to show the beauty of the people that they're with and the love that they encounter along the way, because there's a lot of that also. I want to tell you a little bit about the reasons that I wrote this book. I wrote it because the struggles of migrants and immigrants is very close to my heart. Both of my parents are immigrants from Central America. My father is from El Salvador, and my mother is from Guatemala. And actually, she's from Puerto Barrios, which is right where this book takes place. And I've grown up hearing the stories of and the hardships of leaving one's homeland. It's something that has always been a part of my life. So I wrote it because of those reasons. I've been to Puerto Barrios several times. I have family that still lives there. And also I wrote it because I have cousins who have been threatened in their homelands and felt the need to run and felt that that was their only way to survive. So a lot of my love of family is part of the reason that I wrote this. I also wrote it because when we talk about immigration and migrants, I feel in this country like there's this overgeneralization. There's kind of simplifying, like, oh, it's just because of the danger. But I really wanted to go into the complexities of how that plays out. So I wrote it for that reason. But today I want to focus a little bit about how I really wrote this because of children and teenagers. What sparked my idea for this book, or maybe not idea, but what sparked emotion in me to write it is when I saw the faces of children on television and heard that they were making this journey on La Bestia by themselves, and that they were arriving here without any parents. It just, as a mother And as you know, somebody who is very familiar with Central American culture, it was just really horrifying and sad to me that children were doing that, and being in situations where they felt the need to do that, and they made those trips by themselves. Recently, I've been listening to a podcast called Homeland Insecurity that was put out by Raíces. And Raíces, in case you don't know, is an organization that helps migrants and fights for migrants' rights, and aids them in any way that they can. And there was a statement that their chief advocacy officer made on this podcast. Her name is Erika Andiola, and she said this that I really want to share with you, and that really struck me. She said, "Every day we feed thousands of vulnerable people to a giant detention machine. Every day we feed thousands of vulnerable people to a giant detention machine." And the reason that those words really struck me was because of those thousands of people, thousands of them are children and teenagers. And the reason that struck me is because after writing this book and doing the research and hearing all the real life stories about what children go through, it was horrifying that if and when they survive that kind of trauma, that we then feed them into a giant detention machine. They arrive here, they seeking refuge, and we essentially do something that's going to finish crushing them. I want to give you a number. According to the Council of Foreign Relations, immigration authorities apprehended over 76,000 unaccompanied minors near or at the Mexican-US border in 2019. That's a huge number, over 76,000. That's over 76,000 children who were apprehended without a parent, without the security and the love of a parent there with them, going through a scary time. That's over 76,000 children who flee because staying where they are is more dangerous than the journey to try to leave. And that number doesn't account for the number of children who start on this trip and don't make it to the border, either because they turn back or they don't survive. 76,000 is more than just a number. It's real lives. It's children who are scared and who are seeking safety and who are asking for help. And each one of those children has a story. And that is what I wanted to focus on in this book was the story. I was thinking about history a lot, actually, as I wrote We Are Not From Here. And I was thinking about history because I was wondering how history will record the reality that we're seeing now, and how history will portray migrants. We all know that history has left out important truths and events, and we know that history can often minimize and sanitize those voices and those events. And we know that history has a history of telling the story from the side of the oppressor, or from the side of the oppressor and not the side of the oppressed. So when I see that number, I worry. A part of me sees that number, 76,000, recorded in like future history books. And I worry how a reader will gloss over it, or how they'll gloss over a column, or how they'll gloss over a few paragraphs, or if we're being really generous, gloss over a few pages that try to tell the story of what children went through right now, what migrant children went through right now. And I know that we'll get the numbers, and I know that we'll get the statistics, and I know that we'll get the figures and the names of the detention camps and the policies that were or were not in place. I know that we'll get all of that. But what will history tell of the struggle and the fear and the emotional journey of migrant children? And who will care? And I really did worry about that before and as I wrote this book. I wrote this book because I need the world to care about those children. And I wrote this book because I want 76,000 to take on new meaning. And We Are Not From Here, you read about 3 migrant children, 3 of them, of 76,000. So I know that these books are difficult. I don't shy away from that in my writing, and I understand that they are difficult topics, but they're incredibly important. I think that books like this can make students make sense of the world, and books like this can make what they're seeing very real and personal in a way that news and headlines just can't. That they don't capture that emotion. And I think that books like this can shape the kind of people that young readers want to be and influence how they move in this world as they go forward in life. I know that most teachers actually are not afraid to tackle difficult subjects in their classrooms. I taught for several years, and some of the most meaningful conversations that I had with my students were exactly when we were talking about those tough things in the world. And, we have been teaching classics, and classics have been revered in the classroom that deal with difficult subjects all the time also. You have The Lord of the Flies, you have Streetcar Named Desire, Of Mice and Men, where really difficult things happen and teachers are able to talk about those things. So while this book does deal with really difficult realities, I think that it's a great place, the classroom is a great place for kids to talk about those things and for teachers to talk about those things with them. That being said, that it is a book that deals with difficult things, with violence, with danger, and all of that. That being said, I do want to share something with you. So my book was released on May 19th, and I was really happy that it was finally out in the world. This book took an emotional toll on me. It was a lot of research, and it was a lot of reading and, carrying everything that I was reading and researching and learning more about. So, but I felt that it was a very important book for me to write. And on May 19th, I was so satisfied that it was finally out in the world and that it would be there for readers. And my friend, she sent me a photo of it listed on Amazon with one of those orange banners that you see that says #1 new release. And, I know that you're all pretty familiar with those banners, but usually those banners have a category that the book fits under. And the one that for We Are Not From Here, what said #1 new release in teen and young adult fiction about violence. And, on the one hand, I was really happy that it seemed to be finding its way out there, right? It seemed to be, people were interested in reading about this story about migrant children. But on the other hand, this idea that it fit under this banner of violence kind of hit me a certain way. Because I really feel that that's what happens with stories like this. In the news and in conversation, they are reduced to these stories about violence, right? And they're put under a banner that generalizes them and forgets about the people in the story. They become only numbers or statistics or, one-word descriptors or an orange banner. And I'm not saying that the book doesn't address violence. When you're writing a story about why children are taking a trip like this and why they're running, of course, there's violence. And I feel the responsibility to address it in an honest way. So yes, there is violence in there, the violence that Central American children are dealing with and witnessing. But it's so much more than that. Stories like this are so much more than that. This book, for me, is a book about humanity. And it's a book about love. And it's a book about home and what home is. This book is a book about friendships and found families. It's a story about fear and facing the unknown and about struggle and injustice. It's a story about three teenagers, Pulga, Pequeña, and Chico, who feel very small in the world and they feel very unseen. And it's a book about the basic human right to live. And that is something that every child deserves. And it's also a story about hope. It's about all of those things. But you don't know that unless you crack open the book and you look past, a banner that says it's about violence. And you don't know that unless you dedicate the time to looking at more than just the surface and really digging into those types of stories. I think we see right now more than ever in our everyday, and what's happening in the world right now with Black Lives Matter. I think you see a real need to address with young adults what is happening and doing that in a deep and meaningful way. And I think it's more important than ever to be really truthful with young adults about the state of the world and for us to commit to digging into the kinds of stories that address what we see. Young adults have questions and they want to be told the truth. One thing that I learned in my years of teaching was that they really see past any kind of smoke screens, and they really appreciate being told the truth. And they want a place where they can talk about those things and they can discuss those things and process what they are seeing. And I think that it's in those kinds of discussions where understanding and empathy really grows. And I think it's in those kinds of discussions that students really feel seen and they start to see their part in the larger world and what role they want to play in it. And I know that some of those conversations are happening at home. I'm sure that you are, you who are parents out there are having those kinds of conversations with your children. I'm having those kinds of conversations with my children. But many young adults don't have those conversations going on in their homes. And as all of you know, literature really does open the door for those type of conversations in a really magical kind of way. And the classroom can become a refuge where students get a better sense of the world and how to confront the truths of it. I know that we all work with children and with young adults because we care about them. And we want them to be good individuals, and we tell them that they can change the world, and they can. They can foster a lot of change in the world. But I feel that they must be given the tools. And I think it's our responsibility to give them those tools. Books that are truthful about the injustices in the world, coupled with librarians who can get these books in the right hands and teachers who can guide them through the necessary discussions. I feel like those are the tools. So I hope that, you will help me get this book into the right hands so those type of necessary and important conversations can can take place. So
it's such an important book and such a timely topic. Really need to get this in the right hands and get this into our students' hands to read. Thank you so much for writing that book. I know that
Thank
everybody
you.
here just cannot wait to have it in their collection. And we're so thankful that you were here today.
Thank you.
And they can find more about you at your website.
Yes, absolutely. JennyTorresSanchez.com.
Okay. And then they'll be able to find out about school visits, virtual visits, and all kinds of things.
My email is there and they can shoot me an email.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
being here today, Jenny.
Thank you.
Okay, we're having a great time. We're almost done. It's our evening with Penguin Young Readers and 5 amazing authors who have written books that provide mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors for kiddos. And we are now moving on to our final guest of the evening. We're proud to welcome Ellen Hopkins, who is a New York Times best-selling author of over a dozen books, mostly novels in verse, and also 20 nonfiction titles that you probably have in your library, and 3 books for adults. Her latest Penguin Young Readers book is Closer to Nowhere, which is coming out this fall, and you'll want to make sure that you have it on your fall order list. We just want to welcome, also one more thing about Ellen. She founded Ventana Sierra, a nonprofit youth housing and resource initiative, so we're hoping to hear about that today too. Welcome, Ellen Hopkins.
Hi, thanks for having me. Thanks for pulling me away from my sourdough starter and making me wash my hair and all those things that I kind of forgotten how to do, you know what I mean? It's so nice to be an author again, you know? It's like weird. We've been maneuvering this strange space for a while now and trying to figure out how to write, not knowing what tomorrow is going to bring. I think it's been kind of difficult for a lot of us because I am currently writing my 2nd middle grade book, but I'm here to talk about Closer to Nowhere, which is my debut middle grade, which, you know, it sounds weird, like after all this time to like have a debut book coming out. But, and I also wanted to thank Jenny real quickly for her comments, because as most of you probably know, I mean, YA was, and difficult YA is how I got here. And those difficult topics that she's talking about that affect teens also affect younger kids. And that's something I've really come to know personally. If you guys, I assume you guys all know my book Crank, which is my entry into writing for young people. And that novel was based on my daughter's story of meth addiction. So around that, we have become guardians for several of her children. The first is the baby that you meet in Crank, who's now, Lord, he's 23. So I guess he's not much of a baby anymore. But she had, over the years, she has had 7 children with 7 different fathers. And many of them came from really, really difficult situations. So almost 7 years ago, we had to step in and take custody of 3 more children. At the time, there were 3, 4, and 9. So almost 7 years, you can do the addition. But the oldest, who was 9, came to us with severe PTSD, early childhood trauma suffered because of some of the boyfriends that were in and out of her life. And when he got to us, he was difficult is like such an understatement. He would have like daily giant throw himself on the ground kind of meltdowns. And the PTSD was just like when any too much pressure or any too much, I don't know, people like coming at him with rules or whatever, he would just like freak out and throw a fit. And so it took a lot of work, a lot of therapy, a lot of counseling, a lot of demands that he actually follow rules, which he never grew up with. But through all that time, so through 7 years, he has come like so far. Like I just looked at his report card after distance teaching, helping his distance learning for however long, several 8, 10 weeks, whatever. And he's back up into straight A's again. So he's doing like really, really well. Those meltdowns don't happen anymore. He still gets angry and he will take off and take a walk around the block or whatever, but he's learned to manage the anger and manage that kind of space inside his head where it gets too noisy sometimes. And so I wanted to write a book. And the problem was when he came to us in fourth grade, he started school and he could never make friends because he was that kid in the corner, you know, that was like throwing the hoodie up or yelling at the teacher or whatever. And I wanted to write a book for kids, kind of middle school kids, middle grade kids, to help them understand that kid in the corner. Because he wanted friends, he just didn't know how to manage the noise inside his head and make friends. And when you develop a reputation in fifth grade, especially because we live in a, you know, it's not a giant city, we live near Reno, so it's it was a small elementary school, and a lot of those people followed him through middle school and into high school, and he could never make friends. And so I wanted to bring some kind of understanding to the kids, not just give a voice to those kids, but to bring some understanding to the kid in the back of the classroom that's going, oh my God, I just never want to be that kid. I never want to be around that kid. And so it took me a few years. I was trying to get to how to write it on a middle grade level without it becoming like too overbearing, too maudlin, I needed some humor in it. I couldn't figure out how to do that for a while. But then it came to me one day. I was in the shower, I was dealing with one of the things this kid of ours does is like when he doesn't want to talk about the problems in his life, he makes stories up. Like he's a liar. he makes a big giant whopper lies. And I'm like, well, that's it. So when you meet Cal in here, Cal, when things get too close, when he doesn't want to talk about his story, he makes up big giant stories. And they're pretty funny. You know, you guys would think they're funny. But his cousin Hannah, who he's now living with, doesn't think they're funny. So his mom passes away, his dad is in jail, and he has to come to live with his aunt and his cousin Hannah, who is like the great kid, the gymnast, she does dance, she's like got all kinds of friends. You know, she's like her friends call her the most popular girl in 6th grade. And she's kind of good with that reputation. And when her cousin comes, everything about him kind of like detracts from her shine, I guess, because the attention gets focused on him. And that includes with her parents who have to deal with him now instead of just lifting her up, with the teacher that she has to share with him. So the story is about what makes family, what makes friends, secrets. And maybe I'll just read a little bit of it to you, just to give you an idea. So Cal, again, you know, he tells stories. So his sections, it's in verse, by the way. So it is a novel in verse, 2 voices. Cal, his sections are all factor fiction, because he sometimes makes up stories, sometimes tells the truth. So his are factor fiction. Hannah, she wants to know how everything works. You know, that's how you get your gymnastics routines down. She needs to know definitions. So for her sections are all definition of. And that's how you can tell the different voices in here, plus they're different voices. But I'll start and read a little. So this is from Cal. Factor fiction. You can know where you are and still be lost. Answer. Take it from me. I'm Cal, and I've been lost since Mom died 3 years ago. Oh, I could show you exactly where this town is on a map, lead you through the maze of its streets, though I've only lived here 14 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. I'm safe for now, but I don't know how long that will last. I'm afraid if I start to believe I belong here, everything will change again. It's like off in the distance, I can see something that could be home, but every time I start in that direction, it's farther away. And no matter how hard I try to reach it, I only get closer to nowhere. This is Hannah. Definition of Hannah Lincoln. Wait a second, you want me to define me? Let me think. Okay, here goes. I'm Hannah Lincoln, Dad says we're not related to the dead president, and I believe him. I don't look anything like Honest Abe. He was tall and skinny. I'm short and built muscly like a gymnast because I am one. He had dark hair. Mine's red with highlights like the color of a new penny. He had a beard. No, not even a hint of hair on my chin. But I am like President Lincoln in a good way. One time my dad told me I was honest as the day is long. When I said I didn't know what that meant, he said, trustworthy, 24 hours every day. I ask because I need to understand what stuff means and how things work. If I don't get what someone says, I'll make them explain. If I don't know the definition of a word, I'll look it up. If I don't get the hang of a gymnastics move, I'll practice until I nail it. That's important because I've got a giant dream, which doesn't make me a dreamer, I'm a doer. Focused, dedicated, not afraid to work hard. My coach would tell you I'm all of those things, and they're exactly what it will take to qualify for the Olympics one day. Well, those plus tons of help from my family, I used to count on that. My parents were my support system, totally solid. We were a great team. But like 3 years ago, just before I turned 9, my mom's sister got leukemia and died, and everything started to fall apart. Definition of status quo, the way things were. 3 years ago, this is the way things were. We lived, still do, in a nice house in a sweet neighborhood in a small San Diego suburb. Dad was, still is, a computer whiz, building systems all around Southern California. He had dinner with us pretty much every night. Mom was, still is, the person who made me love dance. She worked at a studio teaching jazz and ballet to help pay for my own lessons. I went, still do, to a grade school just around the corner from home. I'd taken dance for 5 years and been in gymnastics for 4. My parents came to every recital, cheered for me at every meet. They sat close, held hands. I was okay being an only child. Today, this is our status quo. Mom quit her job to take care of Aunt Karen when she got sick and needed a bone marrow transplant. She never went back to work. I wish she would. I think she was happier. I know Dad was. He has to work twice as hard now. He travels around the country showing other people how to build computer systems. We eat too many dinners without him. But when he's home, he and Mom argue a lot, mostly about money and bills. I hate when they yell. I'm in Mrs. Peabody's 6th grade class at the same school I've gone to since kindergarten. I still do dance and gymnastics. Mom drives me to every recital and meet. Dad misses some. When he's there, they sit with a space between them. Oh, and now I'm sharing everything. Home, parents, even my teacher, with my cousin. I'm not so okay with that. So you meet Hannah and Cal. They learn each other's quirks. Cal, by the way, really loves to prank her. So that's another reason why she's not in love with Cal right away. And also, like, her best friend kind of starts to like him, and that really kind of makes her mad because it's her friend and not his. But they work through all these things and write up, and I'm not going to give the ending away, but the ending, you finally learn Cal's story at the end. I'll tell you, when they're in a lockdown. And he's never shared his story before, but everybody is so afraid. So he starts telling stories. And pretty soon the story he tells is what happened to him. So that's kind of the end of the book. Well, not quite the end because it gets nice again, kind of gets fun again, because that's what we have to do. But I love the book. It's really, really close to my heart. I'm so excited that it's coming out and I get to give you middle grade. I'm so excited to be in this new space. It's like, you know, YA has been my home for so long that I kind of think I needed a new challenge to step outside of my comfort zone and to write something a little different. I mean, it is still kind of issue-based fiction, but it'll speak to a wider audience. And I think it will actually speak not only to younger kids, but to parents and teachers, and certainly great librarians out there who we all adore very much. And I know you'll want to get this book into your kids' hands, because it will be important to again, to both the kids on both sides of that spectrum, like the kids that are the troubled kids and the kids that don't understand the troubled kids. And that kind of understanding and empathy building is what we need to start younger and younger. You know, you look at the time we're in, which is, it's crazy. It's like, you know, it's so hard to sign on and not get sucked into, like, you know, what's happening in DC or Minneapolis or California or wherever, and see the hurt and pain that not only the protesters are going through, but the kids that don't understand it. And so I think by empathy building and showing that there's a good side to even the kids don't look like good kids on the surface, that we need to keep digging deeper and deeper until we can get inside them and understand the whys. And once we understand the why behind this stuff, I think really, really necessary. So what else do I want to say about this book? Oh, I want to talk about the next. I'm writing my next one, my next middle grade, which is about brothers, because I'm raising brothers. Lord. You know, it was kind of easier when they were little. Now, because one is like just turned 16 and the other is going to turn 12. And so the 12-year-old wants to catch up to the 16-year-old. And I'm like, no, slow down, dude. Don't be catching up too quick. You can still have fun, you know. So, but yeah, and so this book it's kind of fun moving into that space and looking at the little brother that actually has to take care of the big brother for a reason, which I won't talk about yet. But so here we have a little brother that kind of sometimes has to step up and stand up for his big brother when his big brother's getting in trouble or whatever. And so it's such an interesting dynamic. And I love the dynamic, but I hate dealing with it on a parental level, if you know what I mean. It's really tough. So yeah, we're doing that. On the nonprofit was set up to help aged out foster kids off the street and into college. And so it's kind of been put on a sort of a hold while we try to get into like the financing details again. But we have so far helped 30 young people off the streets and into college. Some of whom, you know, foster kids have a hard time always accepting help, accepting the idea that someone cares about them. So the program, there's been a lot of turnover, but through that program, we have now a nurse, we have a respiratory therapist, we have a guy illustrating comic books, we have a young woman who is what does she just go to? Oh, she's a teacher now. We have another young man who is agenting books. So we've done some good there. And you know, and that all came through the YA part of this. And it all came through here, you know, through people that came to me in need of help, and I could see they needed help. And actually, where that started was, I did a school visit, and it was up in Truckee, California. And there was a young man that, like, it was a pretty big library, and it was full of kids. And this one young man kept asking like all these really good questions. And after the thing was over, and everybody cleared out, that librarian told me that he had been homeless in Truckee, which is often the coldest city in the country, for over a year and a half. And he showed up at school every single day. He was couch surfing. Sometimes he slept in the laundromat, whatever, but he wanted an education. And so he showed up for school every day. She had helped him get into college. And so that's where the idea for the nonprofit came from, was to try to help kids like him who really wanted a way forward, to help give them a way forward. So that's what the nonprofit was established for. And what else? I don't know, you guys have any questions for me? Let me know.
Well, let's see. Does anyone have questions for Ellen? Okay. Well,
okay, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Had to move the scissor lift. I'm at school painting. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate your novels. You are what I see as the person who started the free verse movement. Like, that's my kids come to the library, they say, I've got to have that poetry book. Like, I need one like that. I love that style. Like, it's so easy to read and it flows, and it makes them feel good about themselves that they can take a really thick book and they can finish it in a timely manner, because for my reluctant readers or for my struggling readers, they don't feel good about themselves. And so to take that really thick book and read it and they go, wow, I couldn't put it down. I finished it in a day or two. Like, I've never read a book that fast. I've never read a book like that. And they want more, more, more. And I just think you started that whole movement of free verse to as a format for the kids. And I appreciate so much what you do about taking on tough stories and, listening to the other authors. That's what we need as educators, and as, we need that help. So I just wanted to thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of really fun to see where verse novelist has gone. It's because when I came in, I think there were a couple on the middle grade level, but I think Sonia Sones was the only other person writing verse novel then. And she was like an inspiration to me, by the way. So I think we inspire each other to do things like that. Actually, when I started writing Closer to Nowhere, I sent the proposal out everywhere as prose, and like, there was a lot of interest from a lot of different publishers, and they're all like going, oh, no, you have to do it in verse. I'm like, okay. And, verse is comfort zone for me. I actually write much better in verse. I shouldn't admit that probably, huh? Not that it's easier, it really isn't, because you have to really, word choice is so important, and you have to make every word on that page count, and you have to decide if you want any look to the word placement, and so the challenge of that is really great. So for me, actually, it's a slow process. But the thing about it is, because like, I can't move on until I get like a poem right. So it's very slow as I'm doing it, but there's not a lot of revision on the far end. So I don't write dirty drafts, like, if you know the term dirty drafts, I don't do that. I don't just like bomb through a book and like fix everything after. I fix everything as I go, which is demanding. I'll put it that way.
But there's so much beauty in it, and there's to me, like, when I talk about your books and I show people your books, it's the poetry within the poetry, like the concrete poems, and there's so much more there than meets the eye. If it's so deep, and I just appreciate it. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a visual element to that, especially for reluctant readers. They can often pull into like that, like the picture of the words on the page, that means something to them, and it pulls them onto the page. Whereas a lot of times those big blocks of text, they just like, no, back away. In fact, I think better readers have a harder time getting to reading verse, understanding like what it means to read verse, until they get into it and do it. And adult readers are like, this poetry, what is this? I don't know when our kids start kind of losing, it's about middle grade when they start to kind of lose that love for poetry. But I think verse novels help change that, because, it used to be like, they'd get up right up through Shel Silverstein, and then that was it. They didn't want any more poetry. And now, now they're reading, beautiful stuff out there, Acevedo and Jason Reynolds. And, they're just like amazing books written in this style. And I think it kind of reads almost like rap or musically, it reads musically to them. That a lot of that psychologically, it hits you up here without you noticing it, but yeah, I think so.
Anyone else have a question or comment? All right, we're getting close to the end. I always like to ask our author who has written the most or published the most books, what character from all your books kind of comes and visits you in your brain every now and then? Which one, or maybe which one do you miss the most?
There are a few. It's funny, and it's like Tony from Impulse is one that really comes to me a lot. He's such an interesting young man, and Impulse, out of all my YA, probably kind of pulls to the top, because it really deals with that feeling of depression and maybe thinking about ending it all. And a lot of young people, end up in that space, and they need to understand, they kind of, to know that there's a way out, that they can get better if they keep moving forward. I think that's really important to them. And he is just, because so much terrible stuff has happened to him in his childhood, but he's still he wants to succeed, and and he in fact tries to push these other two friends who are in trouble to succeed. And so he's just like this, he's so resilient and funny, and I just love him.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Well, we've kind of gotten to the end of time. Of course, we'll be sticking around, but I have one last question I want to ask you, and it's also going to apply to Jenny as well. Y'all both participated in a very special book, Our Stories, 21 YA authors get real about injustice, empowerment, and growing up female in America. Just wanted to see if you could just briefly, each one of you could touch on that. The paperback just came out in March. And just briefly, just say what something like that meant to you, and maybe what the title was of the section that you wrote, your contribution.
Well, mine was the accidental activist, and if you follow me on Twitter, I probably scare you, because I'm very active activist. It was funny. I had a young woman on Instagram today come and she goes, "Why aren't you talking about this on Instagram?" I'm like, I gotta have a space where like people feel safe to talk to me. I don't think Twitter's it, but I've been an activist since I was a young teen at the end of the Vietnam War. I had friends who lost brothers in that conflict because of the draft. Kent State, which, again, all this stuff is kind of coming around again. So, as long ago as that was, we still haven't gotten to the other side of that yet. So the idea of activism and feminism and being a voice as a woman, especially when I was younger, women weren't encouraged to speak up. But I've always been, my mom, who was not encouraged to speak up, pushed me toward that way, because she was like, if she would have lived in a different generation, she would have had a whole different life. She would have had a whole different set of rules that applied to her. And I wish she would have had that chance. So that's what my story in that one is about.
Jenny, do you have a comment about your contribution to the book?
You're muted.
Okay.
Nope, I think I just.
You're good.
You're good.
Okay. I wrote about this, what happened to me when I was in middle school. And my father is a truck driver, and he, so he, hauls produce from Florida up north, northeast. And, when he was on the road, he's still on the road, but one time when he was on the road, he was giving somebody instructions on how to find directions in Spanish. So he's over the CB and he's giving them instructions in Spanish. And a couple of people got mad that he was speaking another language. And what ended up happening, it was pretty serious, is that these men, started following my father. Everybody kind of knows everybody in trucking, and who is in which truck and stuff like that. And so these were some other truckers, and they realized it was my father, and they started following him. And they didn't follow him just that day. They ended up following him over a span of several months, and really terrorizing him and telling him to go back where he came from. And it was a really frightening experience, for him, and also for us, my siblings and myself, because he wouldn't come home for months at a time because he didn't want them to know where he lived. So that's what I write about. That story is what I write about in this book, and how, during that time, somebody must have noticed that something was wrong with me and referred me to a counselor to speak to at school, and I wouldn't tell them what was wrong at all. So I just talk about that and kind of tie it into, the racism that we continue to see now, and the racism that really kind of, that Trump's presidency kind of stoked. So, that's the story that I wrote about.
Well, thank you all so much. Now we're at the end. I want to thank all of our authors for being here. Kyle and I always stick around, and I know Sheila said that she would like for this to go another hour. But want to let everybody know, we tell the authors that they can come and go, they can show up for their part, they can stick around, and they sat here and they stayed the whole time. So that says a lot about their support of their fellow authors and their love for literature and stuff and character and all those great things. So thank you all for being here. We really thank you. So we want to thank Anne Blankman.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, yes, yes, go ahead.
I want to say something. I think one of the reasons why all the authors hung around, I once heard somebody say that an author doesn't write a different book. The same book gets rewritten different times. I think it's related to right now. I think that all the stories that have been shared, it felt like the same story, but a different person wearing a different cultural, racial background costume telling it. Like I just felt so many similarities between everybody's stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Torie. So again, Anne Blankman, Jenny Torres Sanchez, Torie Maldonado, Irene Latham, Ellen Hopkins, and Kareem. He's not on here, so I don't have his name in front of me, but what was it, Irene? I'll go ahead and say it here. Kareem Shamsi Basha. We're so honored for you to join us today. Sheila as well. Thank you for making this happen. Everybody who's in here, and make sure you and your colleagues throughout your district, make sure that you have these books in your library. They are so important. Oh my gosh. Thank you very much for writing them. Thank you for writing for kids. Anybody else want to say anything before they go? Just anybody?
I'll just let you know my website is now ellenhopkinsbooks.com because GoDaddy kind of let my domain go and somebody bought it up. So it's ellenhopkinsbooks.com if you want to come visit over there. And yeah, let's do some visits. Let's do some virtual, or hopefully we'll all be back in the classrooms here before too long. Let's talk to your kids.
Yes. Our Oklahoma librarians are really great at hosting authors, so they might be contacting you to set something up. Okay. Anybody else? Okay.